Today, if a government wants to spy on you, they use satellites in orbit. They deploy high-altitude drones. They intercept digital signals. But for over 2 decades, the CIA poured millions into a completely different kind of surveillance. They tried to steal state secrets using mind readers. It sounds like the plot of a cheap paperback novel, but the documents are fully declassified. The funding was appropriated by Congress, and the experiments were conducted inside federal facilities. The program was called Project Stargate. To understand how intelligence agencies ended up funding psychic spies, you have to look at the psychological climate of the 1970s. The Cold War had pushed global paranoia to an absolute peak. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a zero-sum competition for global dominance. Every scientific advancement was treated as a potential weapon, driving massive escalations in both nuclear stockpiles and space exploration. American defense budgets swelled to counter every new Soviet capability, creating a perpetual cycle of retaliatory technological buildup. In an environment where falling behind meant risking total destruction, officials couldn't afford to ignore any potential advantage. If there was even a fractional chance that supernatural abilities could be weaponized, the military had no choice but to investigate it. The catalyst came in the early 70s, when intelligence reports began trickling in with an alarming claim. Soviet scientists were actively pouring vast resources into paranormal research. This sparked panic over what officials called a psychic gap. If mental telepathy or clairvoyance were real, the Soviets might figure out how to eavesdrop on classified briefings directly from Moscow, creating an undetectable strategic threat. The American countermeasure was Project Stargate. Operating under the highest levels of U.S. intelligence, its mission was to rigorously test whether certain individuals could gather actionable intelligence using nothing but the power of the human mind. Strategic desperation, rather than naivete, kept the project afloat. Cold War officials weighed the ridicule of funding psychics against the risk of a Soviet breakthrough, and they chose to pay the bill. The core focus of Project Stargate was a specific technique known as remote viewing. This is the claimed ability to mentally observe and describe distant, unseen locations without physically being there. The testing protocol was strictly isolated. Researchers would place participants in a sterile room and hand them a piece of paper containing nothing but geographic coordinates or vague clues. The viewers would then sit down and attempt to draw or narrate what they saw. The goal was to produce detailed sketches of highly classified Soviet bases, weapons facilities, and covert military activities located thousands of miles away. A steady stream of statistical anomalies provided just enough political cover to secure the program's budget. Every time a viewer produced a sketch that mirrored a satellite photo of a secret hangar, it gave the project's advocates the evidence they needed to justify another year of research. Within intelligence circles, specific participants became minor legends. Stories circulated of psychic spies successfully tracking missing aircraft, pinpointing the location of hostages, and mapping the interiors of foreign weapons facilities sight unseen. For the true believers inside the agency, these isolated hits were all the proof they needed. They were convinced they had stumbled onto an undiscovered evolutionary leap in human capability. But if the results were truly that compelling, we have to ask an obvious question. Why didn't the CIA build an entire standing army of psychic spies? The answer emerged when outside agencies finally commissioned independent scientific reviews to evaluate the program's raw data. This animation shows exactly how confirmation bias skewed the results. The data points represent a psychic's massive volume of guesses. Evaluators would look at the actual outcomes, find a loose match in the psychic's rambling description, and essentially draw the target around the arrow after it had already landed. The thousands of completely wrong guesses were quietly ignored. When you apply strict scientific controls to that same dataset, the pattern collapses. The absolute killer for remote viewing was repeatability. The few individuals who made astonishingly accurate claims could not reproduce those results reliably under closely monitored, controlled conditions. In the end, Project Stargate could not survive the basic requirements of the scientific method. Subjective belief and compelling anecdotes simply couldn't hold up to the demand for rigorous, repeatable proof. By the mid-1990s, the government issued its final blunt assessment. There was no convincing evidence that remote viewing could ever be used as a dependable operational intelligence tool. The program was permanently shut down. It left behind a trail of millions of dollars spent, decades of highly classified time logged, and thousands of failed experiments. The existence of this program highlights a massive bureaucratic commitment to the impossible. High-ranking intelligence officers viewed the human mind as a legitimate military resource, establishing a formal infrastructure to exploit it. And they didn't stop there. The same era saw the CIA fund MKUltra, experimenting with mind-altering substances and psychological manipulation. They drafted plans involving acoustic spy cats and secret listening devices strapped to dolphins. Time and again, historical records prove that the actual programs buried in government vaults are far stranger than internet conspiracy theories, which leaves us with a deeply unsettling question. If the intelligence apparatus of the United States once officially funded an army of psychic spies, what completely unbelievable experiments are operating deep inside their black budgets today? While Project Stargate never produced a reliable psychic weapon, it provided a clear window into the psychology of global conflict. When a nation fears losing the future, it will systematically pursue even the most unbelievable strategies.